Hello, and thank you for joining me for this contest of cinema production. In this corner, we have the camera that breathed new life into a company, the camera that introduced phase-detect autofocus to a brand which always had autofocus as their Achilles heel. And in this corner, we have the king of B-Raw. It dropped the pocket and became a rocket. The BlackMagic Cinema Camera 6K. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, let's start this bout, the Battle of the L-Mount. This video is not sponsored by either brand. I wanted to make this video because if you're like me in the market for a new video camera, you're probably looking at the Panasonic Lumix S5iiX. That was my plan, but then Blackmagic went and announced the Cinema Camera 6K, and that threw a huge wrench in my plans. So let me start this comparison by stating my bias. I got into Panasonic cameras about 4 years ago. I started with her Micro Four Thirds and upgraded the S5, and then got the S5 II earlier this year, and I couldn't be happier. It actually convinced me to go through the painstaking process of switching camera brands. I walked away from my Nikon DSLRs that I've used professionally since 2017, and I moved completely to Panasonic. I did this mainly because I was becoming more of a hybrid shooter, and Nikon's video, let's be honest, leaves much to be desired. Don't get me wrong, I captured some beautiful images with my Nikons, but with both Nikon and Canon announcing that they're abandoning their DSLR line and focusing solely on mirrorless, I was using a dying technology. Plus again, I needed better video. Just look at my Sigma 105mm macro review. You'll see. So I currently have the S5 and the S5 II. The S5 is basically my photo camera, and the S5 II is my hybrid. But it was becoming a pain in the butt to constantly break it down out of the cinema rig for every photography session that I had, and then build it back up. I was in the market for a camera that I could use exclusively for video. That's why the S5iiX was next in line to be purchased. I know, first world problems. The S5iiX is pretty much identical to the S5 II, besides a few upgrades and a new paint job. The S5iiX can shoot B-RAW and ProRes RAW through an external recorder. The S5 II can do that with a paid upgrade. The S5iiX can record straight to the SSD, it can live stream, and it can record in all intra codecs. But then Blackmagic announced the new Cinema Camera 6K. Not only is this also a full-frame sensor, they also adopted the L-mount. Now it made me rethink my entire plan. I do edit exclusively with the DaVinci Resolve Studio, so being able to shoot B-RAW internally is a huge benefit. So after a lot of internal discussion and arguments, I'm pretty sure I've come to my decision. But maybe you're like me, looking at these two cameras and trying to figure out which one would be better. Let's get into it and hopefully I can help you answer that question. Let's start with everything that's the same between the S5iiX and the Cinema Camera 6K. Both are full frame and they both support the awesome and growing L mount. On top of the new lenses, this also lets you mount all your older lenses onto the same camera. I have older EF lenses and Nikon F lenses, and even some Pentax K lenses that I've used on my S5 and S5 II, and they all work great. They both shoot up to 6K resolution, and both can shoot in open gate. Open gate means that it uses the entire size of the sensor, so the video has a 4:3 aspect ratio, like photos are. This helps with a higher resolution if you want that, but mainly, it leaves room for you to crop in, so you can shoot one video, crop it into a horizontal video. But if you want to take that same video and make it vertical, you're going to have more room on the top and bottom of the frame than you would if you shot in the traditional 16:9 aspect ratio. They both boast a huge amount of different resolutions, 1080p, 4K, and 6K, up to 60 frames per second for 1080p and 4K. They both use the full sensor up to 4K 30 frames per second. After that, you do apply a Super 35 crop up to 60 frames per second. This is a 1.5 times crop, so your 50mm becomes a 75mm. They both support anamorphic lenses. They both support USB-C recording. They both can be powered using the USB-C port. Both include a 3.5mm microphone and headphone jack. Both are touchscreen. Now, let's break down the similarities between them. For slow motion, the Cinema 6K can shoot 1080p at 120 frames per second. The S5iiX can shoot up to 180 frames per second. Now personally, I like the S5 II and the S5iiX's 1080p 120 frames per second versus the 180. The 120 frames per second does look a lot cleaner than the 180 frames per second. So I don't think there's much of a difference between those two cameras. But if you do need those extra 60 frames per second, the S5iiX is going to win on this one. For open gate, they both can do it, but the Cinema 6K can shoot up to 36 frames per second. The S5iiX can only shoot up to 30 frames per second in open gate. I have to say that is a big benefit to the Cinema Camera 6K because you can take that 36 frames per second, put it on a 24 frames per second timeline, and slow the image down to a 66% speed. If you did the same thing with the S5iiX and dropped that 30 frames into a 24 frame timeline, you can only slow it down 80%. Now, 66% speed isn't a whole lot, but it might be enough to give you a little bit of slow motion. It may smooth out any of the jumpiness you might have in your video. The resolution in the open gate is also a little bit different. The S5iiX's open gate resolution is 5,952 by 3968, while the Cinema Camera 6K open gate is 6,048 by 4,032. Now it's not much of a difference considering you're already working with a lot of pixels. It's less than 100 pixels in both vertical and horizontal, but it is something that I think you should know about. Both cameras include a dual native ISO. Now the Cinema Camera 6K's native ISO is 400 and 3200 ISO. The S5iiX in Vlog native ISO is 640 and 4000 ISO. Even though it's pretty close, this could be a big difference for you. If you shoot mostly outside in well-lit areas, the 400 ISO of the Cinema Camera 6K might be better for you. It cuts over half a stop down from the 640 base ISO from the S5iiX, so you may be able to leave your ND filters off the camera. But if you're recording events like wedding receptions or other low-lit areas, getting that 4000 native ISO as opposed to the 3200 native ISO can lead to a cleaner image if you do need to bump up your ISO. Dynamic range is also similar. The S5iiX is rated at 14 stops of dynamic range, where the Cinema Camera 6K is only rated at 13 stops. Is that really going to be noticeable? Probably not. But if you are shooting internally, having that 12-bit RAW video is going to outweigh having that one stop of dynamic range. Battery life, the S5iiX is rated at about 2 hours of continuous shooting, where the Cinema Camera 6K is rated for about 1 hour of continuous video. Now the biggest difference that you have between the S5iiX and the Cinema Camera 6K is that the Cinema Camera 6K has an optical low-pass filter, where the S5II and the S5iiX do not. This, I believe, is a big reason why the S1H is still so popular today, even with the S5iiX and the S5II out with their new autofocus. An optical low-pass filter kind of softens up the image a little bit. A lot of people say it looks a lot more cinematic and natural. The other main benefit is that it cuts down on moire, that slick, oily look you can get from repeating patterns. Even for photography, an optical low-pass filter can really help, but it can make the image slightly less sharp. It's really your own preference if you see the low-pass filter as a positive or a negative. Me, I'm going to give it to the Cinema Camera 6K because moire is such a headache to deal with. For autofocus, the S5iiX has that new phase detect autofocus from Panasonic. The Cinema Camera 6K, they really don't say a lot about the autofocus, so I'm assuming that nothing's really changed. For the average person, I think you're going to get more use out of the phase detect autofocus from the S5iiX. Not having the Cinema Camera 6K in hand, I can only assume that it's going to be faster and more accurate. I don't think this is a deal breaker for the normal Blackmagic customer though. Most cinematographers use manual focus anyway, so autofocus might not be an issue for you. Speaking of things that may benefit the traditional manual focus user, the screen on both these cameras are different. The S5iiX has the traditional 3-inch flippy screen that most Panasonic cameras have, where the Cinema Camera 6K has a much larger 5-inch display. This will make it easier for you to see your image and to make sure focus is on and accurate. The S5II display will pull forward so you can see yourself recording like I am here, but the Cinema Camera 6K won't flip forward, it'll only tilt up and down. The S5iiX can stream wirelessly, where the Cinema Camera 6K, I don't see anything saying that it has that feature. Now me personally, I don't live stream at all, so this is a non-issue for me, but I want you to know about it. Now the S5iiX has 2 SD card slots, where the Cinema Camera 6K only has 1 CF Express Type B slot. Personally, when I started my business, I made it mandatory that whatever camera I had would always have 2 card slots, because I wanted to have an automatic backup of any image that I took. It would be a living nightmare if I did a wedding or any other session and I came back and my card was corrupted. I've only ever had this happen once, and it was on vacation for vacation photos, so it wasn't a big deal. Plus, I had that backup. But with the Cinema Camera 6K only having 1 slot, you do run that risk. I will say CF Express Type B cards are more reliable than SD cards. You'll just have to ask yourself, do you want to take that risk? For XLR audio, the Cinema Camera 6K has 2 built-in XLR mounts with phantom power built into the camera. The S5iiX doesn't have any built into the camera, but you can get the XLR adapter from Panasonic, and that will work with the S5iiX. The Cinema Camera 6K can record B-RAW internally using that CF Express Type B card, along with creating the H.264 proxies at the same time. The S5iiX can record B-RAW, but you will need to purchase a Blackmagic Video Assist monitor, which will set you back another $800. But it can do ProRes 422 Max HQ through the USB-C port. But without any external recorder, you're stuck with 422 10-bit up to all intra codecs versus the 12-bit B-RAW that you're going to get from the Cinema 6K. And this brings us to the final piece of information, the price. Now when Blackmagic announced the Cinema 6K, I saw everything that was included and I was hoping the price would be over $3,000, because then they would have made my decision for me. I was hoping for something like $3,200 when they announced it, something just above my price range. That way I wouldn't have to compare the 2 cameras. But when they announced that it was only $2,600, I was upset. Now compared to the S5iiX's $2,200 price tag, I'm going to have to dig in, do the research, and see which camera is going to be better for me. The Blackmagic Cinema Camera 6K is debuting at $2,600, where the S5iiX is $2,200. Now, it is $400 cheaper, but again, if you're looking for that B-raw, you are going to have to drop another $800 down, making the cost $3,000 right off the bat. Along if you need the XLR ports, you're going to have to buy that adapter as well. Both of these cameras are reasonably priced, and you can't go wrong with either one. So let's sum it up. So who would I recommend the Cinema 6K to? If you're in a studio setting with more time to set up and plan your shots, I really think you're going to use this camera a lot more. If you're already a DaVinci Resolve user, you're going to get that B-raw along with the proxies automatically made. You don't need to buy the BlackMagic Video Assist. You also get the higher frame rate at the 6K. This camera would be great for you if you're looking just for a video camera. Now, who would I recommend the S5iiX to? If you're more of a run and gun shooter or a hybrid shooter like me, and you want both high quality video and photos, you're going to get that out of the S5iiX. If you have less time to set up your shots and you're capturing more of the candid moments, this is going to be the better camera for you. I hope this video helps you make a decision or make the decision a little bit easier. Both are phenomenal cameras, and I guarantee you're going to be happy with the footage coming out of either one. What am I going to do? I'll be straight with you right now. I'm like 90% certain with my answer. It's not a decision I'm planning on making tomorrow, but I know I'm going to buy one of these. I'm highly certain I'm going to stick with the S5iiX. I'm used to Panasonic, I have all the batteries, and most of my video is run and gun. I record my kids playing to the park and birthday parties. I do a lot of work with the youth program at my church, and there's not a lot of time to plan most of that around. I do like manual focus, and the larger screen on the Cinema Camera 6K would make it easier, but when you have a bunch of tiny monsters running around, it's really hard to keep focus on them. And with me being more of a hybrid shooter, I really like the fact that if anything happened to either one of my other two cameras, I would have this as a backup of my backup. BlackMagic announcing the camera almost won me over, and if I did more setup videos and less run and gun, honestly, I probably would have went for that. But the sensor stabilization, the autofocus, and be able to use it as a photography camera made the decision for me. Both are truly phenomenal cameras, and I'm sure you'd be happy with either one. Thank you for listening and watching. No matter where you are in your photography or video journey, stay inspired, keep growing, and never settle for average. Thank you.